For a split second, when I saw 3 patrol cars crawl into Maplewood Estates with their lights flashing, I honestly thought something awful had happened, like a kid had been hit or a house was on fire. Then one of the officers looked straight at me, confused, scanning the sidewalk like he was searching for a getaway car that wasn't there, and my stomach dropped. Because the vehicle they were hunting was me. I was sitting in my electric wheelchair, parked neatly on the right side of the sidewalk, hands resting on my lap like I'd been caught doing something criminal by existing in public. And a few feet behind the officers, practically vibrating with excitement, was Cynthia Hale, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, lips pressed into that smug little smile like she'd finally won something. One officer stepped closer and asked, polite but cautious, "Ma'am, have you seen a vehicle driving on the sidewalk?" I blinked once, then nodded toward myself. "You're looking at it." He frowned, glanced at my chair, then back at his radio like it had betrayed him. And that's when Cynthia jumped in, loud enough for half the block to hear. "She's been terrorizing the neighborhood, running over kids, chasing dogs, ruining the peace. She's dangerous." I just stared at her, stunned, because I live quietly. I work from home. I pay my dues. I wave at people. The wildest thing I do is roll down the sidewalk to check the mail and feel the sun on my face. But Cynthia had decided I didn't belong here, and she was done pretending otherwise. It hadn't started with police, obviously. Cynthia doesn't open with sirens. She warms up first. Little comments by the mailbox. Little concerns at the clubhouse. Little sighs like I was personally lowering property values by daring to exist with a disability. The first time she really came for me, she didn't even look at my face. She looked at my chair. That thing, she said, nose wrinkling like I'd tracked mud into her living room, isn't allowed to be running up and down the sidewalk all day. I remember thinking how weird it felt that she kept calling it that. Not her chair, not your chair, just that. Like if she stripped away enough humanity, her story would sound reasonable. I tried to keep it light. It's a mobility device. It's literally what sidewalks are for. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that line. Well, I'm just looking out for the community. You know, kids, dogs, safety. Then she leaned in a little voice, sweet and sharp at the same time. And if you don't take it seriously, I will. I should have known then what she meant. So, on that sunny afternoon when the officers finally asked her carefully what she meant by vehicle, Cynthia pointed at me like she was pointing at a threat. That thing. She drives it up and down the sidewalk all day long. It's illegal. It's disturbing. Disturbing. Like I was a horror movie prop and not a person trying to live my life. The officer's face did this tiny flicker confusion, first, then something like pity, then irritation. He crouched a little so he could talk to me at eye level, which I appreciated more than he probably realized, and asked, "How fast does it go?" I told him the truth. At full speed, about 4 miles per hour, less if my battery's low. He nodded. So basically, a brisk walk. Then he stood up, turned to Cynthia, and explained calmly that electric wheelchairs are legally considered mobility devices, not motor vehicles, and sidewalks are exactly where they're supposed to be. Cynthia didn't like that answer at all. She crossed her arms tighter and snapped, "Then she should be in the street. She's in the way out here." That's when the second officer chimed in flat and firm, "Ma'am, forcing a wheelchair user into the street would be dangerous. If anything, that would be the real violation." For half a second I thought Cynthia might actually explode. Her face flushed red, her mouth tightened, her eyes flashed like her brain was recalculating the next move. And then she did something almost impressive in its audacity. She smiled. "Fine," she said, sweet as syrup. "If you won't arrest her, I'll handle it through the HOA. No motors on the sidewalk. I'm issuing a fine." One officer sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from someone who spent years dealing with people who refuse to hear the word no. He told her bluntly that issuing fines based on made-up rules was a bad idea and that she should probably leave me alone. Then he turned back to me, apologized for the hassle, and told me to have a good day. As they drove away, Cynthia didn't say another word. She just stared at me with this look that made my skin crawl like she'd lost a battle, but was already planning the war. I went home shaking, not from fear exactly, more like adrenaline mixed with anger, plus this deep old sadness I hadn't felt in years. It's exhausting realizing that no matter how quiet you live, no matter how carefully you follow every rule, someone can still decide you're a problem just for existing. For a while I considered letting it go. People like Cynthia thrive on reaction, and part of me hoped embarrassing her in front of 3 officers might be enough to make her back off. But instead of fading into the background, she got bolder. Neighbors started telling me she was complaining about me at homeowners association meetings, calling me disruptive, saying I scared potential buyers, claiming she was protecting the neighborhood. And then the letter came official-looking, stamped formal language like a weapon wrapped in stationery. Violation notice. Motor vehicle use in common areas. Fine $250. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the punchline. My chair wasn't a toy, wasn't a scooter, wasn't some rebellious joyride. It was my legs, and now the HOA was basically telling me my legs were illegal. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a dramatic screaming way, in a quiet, steady way like a switch flipping from survive to fight. If Cynthia wanted to use the system against me, then I was going to step into that system and drag it into the light. So I decided to run for the HOA board. On paper, I was qualified. I owned my home outright. I paid my dues on time. I had no violations, well, not real ones. There was no legitimate reason I shouldn't be allowed to run. When Cynthia found out, she cornered me in the clubhouse hallway. I can still hear her heels clicking against the tile, sharp and angry like punctuation. She didn't bother pretending to be polite this time. She leaned in close and said, "You really think people want someone like you making decisions for them?" I felt my face go hot. What does that mean? She scoffed like I was insulting her intelligence. "Don't play dumb. You're a liability." Then she smiled again, small, cruel. "And I'll make sure your name never makes it onto a ballot." I told her she couldn't do that. She laughed. Watch me. Election season rolled in. Notices went out. Neighbors chatted about candidates near their mailboxes like it was the most normal thing in the world. And when the ballots were finally posted, my name wasn't there. At first, I felt that familiar wave of doubt, the one that creeps in when you've been pushed around long enough. The voice that whispers, maybe you messed up. Maybe you missed a deadline. Maybe you're overreacting. So I checked my records. Then I checked them again. Everything was there. Form submitted. Deadlines met. Confirmation emails saved. I emailed the homeowners association, no response. I called voicemail. When I finally got someone on the line, they said it must have been a clerical error and suggested I try again next year. Try again next year. Like being erased was just a seasonal inconvenience. That was the moment my doubt finally burned off and turned into something sharper. Because now I knew for sure this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. That night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, hands hovering over the keys, and I almost did the thing I always do when I'm tired, when I'm worn down, when I just want the world to stop pushing. I almost wrote an email that started with, "I'm sorry for the trouble." I almost convinced myself that maybe Cynthia was right. Maybe I was making everyone uncomfortable. Maybe I should just keep my head down and stay quiet. And then I caught myself, because what would that mean? It would mean the sidewalk wasn't mine. The ballot wasn't mine. The neighborhood I paid for wasn't mine. It would mean I had to shrink my life down to fit inside Cynthia's comfort. No, not this time. So I started researching not out of spite, but out of self-defense. I dug into disability law, into housing protections, into the fact that organizations like a homeowners association don't get to hide behind paperwork when discrimination is this clear. And the more I read, the colder I got. Because what Cynthia was doing wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. The next morning I called a lawyer. Saying it out loud for the first time felt surreal, like I was stepping into a version of my life I never expected to live. I wasn't suing because I wanted money. I was suing because someone had crossed a line, and if I didn't push back, she'd keep crossing it. With me, or with the next person who couldn't fight as hard. When Cynthia was served, the shift was immediate. Suddenly, emails started pouring in from the HOA apologetic, overly polite, full of phrases like unfortunate oversight and filing mistake. They offered to make sure everything went smoothly next year if I dropped the case. I forwarded every message to my lawyer. He sent back one letter and told them to stop contacting me directly. After that, the silence was deafening, the kind that tells you people are scrambling behind closed doors. Court day came faster than I expected. I rolled into that courtroom feeling smaller than I ever had, and stronger at the same time. My lawyer presented the records showing my application had been received and then mysteriously disappeared. Cynthia tried to play innocent, claimed it was a misunderstanding. A paperwork issue, an honest mistake. But the other board members faced with real legal consequences cracked. They admitted Cynthia had told them not to put my name on the ballot. One of them even said she'd threatened them if they spoke up. I didn't look at Cynthia while they talked. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the room shifting, like the story was changing shape from accident to pattern, from coincidence to discrimination. The judge didn't yell. She didn't dramatize it. She leaned back, folded her hands, and asked Cynthia a few calm, precise questions that somehow felt sharper than any accusation. Why had the paperwork only gone missing in my case? Why did multiple board members remember being told not to include my name? Why, if this was a clerical error, did no one contact me before ballots went out? Cynthia's answers got shorter. Her voice lost that confident edge she always had in the neighborhood. By the end, she wasn't explaining anymore. She was deflecting, and everyone in that room could feel it. When the ruling came, it was firm and unambiguous. The Homeowners Association had violated federal disability law. Full stop. No excuses, no gentle phrasing. The judge said organizations like HOAs don't get to hide behind paperwork when discrimination is this clear. The association was fined heavily enough that you could practically see the panic ripple through their side of the room. And Cynthia was fined personally. Not huge, but symbolic. The kind of fine that says, "This one's on you." The judge also ordered a new election. Cynthia didn't look at me on the way out. She kept her eyes glued forward, jaw tight, moving fast, like she could outrun the consequences if she walked hard enough. A week later, she resigned from the board. No speech, no apology, just gone. And the first time I rolled down that same sidewalk afterward, the air felt different, not because someone granted me permission to belong, but because I refused to accept that I didn't. Lesson: don't shrink yourself to make a bully. Comfortable, make the system face what it's become.